My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 29 years old, and before my life fell apart, I used to believe that bad things only happen to other people. Not to families like mine, not to mothers like mine. My mom, Diane Mitchell, was the kind of woman everybody loved. She worked at a small diner in Columbus, Ohio, for almost 20 years, and somehow she still came home smiling every night, even after standing on her feet for 12 hours. She used to say, "Life is hard, sweetheart, but we don't have to become hard with it." That was my mother, warm, patient, gentle, the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday, but forgot to buy things for herself. Every morning before work, she made coffee for both of us in our tiny apartment kitchen. The smell of pancakes and cinnamon always filled the air, while old country music played softly from her little radio. "You're skipping breakfast again," she would complain, while putting toast on my plate. And every morning I'd kiss her cheek and say, "I'm late, Mom." Then she'd laugh and call me her favorite nickname, "My sunshine." I didn't know those ordinary mornings would become the most precious memories of my life. A few weeks before everything changed, I noticed Mom rubbing her temples more often. "You okay?" I asked one evening, while she folded laundry on the couch. "Just tired," she answered quickly. But she looked pale. One night at dinner, she accidentally dropped her fork. Her hand shook slightly. "Mom?" "I'm fine, Sarah," she snapped. Then her face softened immediately. "I just need rest." The truth was simple. We couldn't afford doctors. I worked as a nursing assistant at a rehab center, barely making enough to cover rent and groceries. My mom's diner paycheck helped keep us alive. Missing work wasn't an option for either of us, so she ignored the headaches, ignored the dizziness, ignored the exhaustion slowly eating her alive. And I let her. That guilt still follows me every night. The day everything happened was cold and rainy. I remember because Mom left wearing my favorite blue scarf. "Don't wait up," she said at the door. "Friday nights are always busy." I smiled without looking away from my phone. "Love you." She pointed at me jokingly. "You better." Those were the last normal words my mother ever said to me. Around 8:30 that night, my phone rang while I was folding towels at work. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. "Hello?" "Is this Sarah Mitchell?" a woman asked urgently. "Yes?" "There's been an emergency involving your mother." My stomach dropped instantly. The nurse explained that Mom had collapsed at the diner during her shift. One of the waitresses found her unconscious near the kitchen. I don't even remember driving to the hospital. I just remember shaking so hard I could barely breathe. When I arrived, the emergency room smelled like antiseptic and fear. Doctors rushed past me while machines beeped loudly in every direction. Finally, a tired-looking doctor approached me. "Your mother suffered a severe stroke." The world stopped. What does that mean?" He sighed gently. "She has partial paralysis on her left side. There's also some memory confusion. We won't know the full damage yet." I stared at him blankly. Stroke. That word sounded too old for my mother, too cruel, too permanent. When they finally allowed me into her room, I almost collapsed. Mom looked so small lying in that hospital bed. Half her face drooped slightly. Tubes surrounded her arms. Machines breathed and blinked around her like cold metal ghosts. I grabbed her hand immediately. Mom! Her eyes slowly opened. For one beautiful second, I thought everything would be okay. Then she looked directly at me with confusion. Fear! Distance! She whispered weakly, "Who are you?" My heart shattered so violently, I actually felt pain in my chest. I tried to smile anyway. "It's me," I whispered. "Sarah." But she kept staring at me like I was a stranger. I couldn't hold myself together anymore. I ran into the hospital bathroom, locked the door, and slid onto the floor, crying so hard I could barely breathe. I covered my mouth so nobody would hear me breaking apart, because deep down, I already knew my life would never be the same again. About an hour later, I overheard the doctor speaking quietly outside her room. "She'll need full-time care," he said. "Recovery could take years." Years. I looked through the small glass window at my mother sleeping helplessly in bed. The same woman who once carried me through fevers, worked double shifts to feed me, held me after every heartbreak. Now she couldn't even remember my name. My hands trembled as tears rolled down my face. But I whispered the words anyway. "I'll do it." My voice cracked. "Even if it destroys my life." 3 weeks after my mother's stroke, our apartment no longer felt like home. It felt like a hospital room squeezed into a 2-bedroom apartment. Medicine bottles covered the kitchen counter. Medical bills piled up beside the microwave. A wheelchair blocked the hallway. The smell of disinfectant replaced the smell of Mom's pancakes. And somehow, everything happened so fast. One day, my mother was laughing while watching cooking shows. The next day, I was helping her learn how to hold a spoon again. I stopped sleeping normally after she came home from the hospital. Every night became a routine of alarms, medications, bathroom trips, and fear. I barely recognized myself anymore. My hair stayed messy. Dark circles formed under my eyes. Some mornings, I forgot whether I had eaten or not. But none of that hurt as much as seeing my mother embarrassed by her own weakness. One evening, I helped her sit at the kitchen table while feeding her chicken soup slowly with a spoon. Her left hand trembled badly. Half the soup spilled onto the blanket covering her lap. "I'm sorry," she whispered immediately. "It's okay, Mom." "No," she said quietly, tears filling her eyes. "You shouldn't have to do this." I forced a smile even though my chest felt heavy. "You took care of me my whole life. This is nothing." But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. Some nights, after working 10-hour shifts at the rehab center, I came home so exhausted, I cried silently while washing dishes. Then I'd hear Mom calling weakly from her room, "Sarah?" And no matter how tired I was, I always answered. One night, around 2 a.m, I heard a crash. I ran into her room and found her crying beside the bed. She had tried to walk to the bathroom alone. "I didn't want to wake you," she sobbed. I helped lift her carefully from the floor, but she suddenly broke down completely. "I hate this," she cried. "I hate needing help for everything." I wrapped my arms around her gently. Her body felt so fragile now, like life itself was slowly slipping away piece by piece. "You're not alone," I whispered. But honestly, sometimes I felt alone too. My boyfriend, Tyler, used to visit almost every day after Mom first got sick. At first, he was supportive. He brought groceries, helped with prescriptions, held me when I cried. But slowly, things changed. One Friday night, he sat quietly on the couch while I organized Mom's medications. "You haven't looked at me in 20 minutes, he muttered. I sighed tiredly. "I'm trying to make sure Mom takes the right pills." "That's all you do now, Sarah." I looked up. "What does that mean?" He rubbed his face in frustration. "Your whole life revolves around your mother." The words hit me hard. "What's wrong with that?" I asked quietly. "Nothing," he answered quickly. "But this isn't healthy anymore." I stared at him in disbelief. Healthy? My mother could barely walk. She forgot things constantly. Sometimes she woke up terrified because she didn't recognize her own bedroom. And he was worried about healthy? Before I could answer, Mom suddenly called from her room. "Sarah?" Tyler leaned back with annoyance while I rushed away immediately. That was the moment I realized I was starting to lose him, too. A few days later, my Aunt Carol came to visit. I never liked her much. She always wore expensive clothes and fake smiles that never reached her eyes. "Oh my God!" she said dramatically while looking around the apartment. "This place feels depressing." I clenched my jaw silently. Mom smiled weakly from her wheelchair. "Nice to see you too, Carol." For the next hour, Aunt Carol pretended to care. But I noticed the way she kept asking strange questions. "How much are the medical bills now?" "Did Diane still have savings?" "What about life insurance?" Every question felt colder than the last. Then finally she said it. "You should consider putting her in a nursing home." The room went silent. Mom looked down immediately. I felt anger burn through my body. "She's staying with me," I answered firmly. Carol crossed her arms. "Sarah, you're wasting your youth on a hopeless situation." Hopeless? I saw my mother's eyes fill with tears instantly. After Carol left, Mom stayed unusually quiet all evening. Later that night, while I brushed her hair gently beside the bed, she suddenly whispered, "I'm sorry for becoming a burden." Something inside me broke. I dropped the hairbrush onto the blanket. "You are not a burden," I said sharply. Tears rolled down my face before I could stop them. "You carried me when Dad abandoned us. You worked double shifts so I could eat. You stayed awake during every fever, every nightmare, every heartbreak." My voice cracked harder. "Now it's my turn." Mom started crying softly. And for the first time since her stroke, I cried in her arms like a little girl again. Later that night, after she finally fell asleep, I walked to the front door to throw away the trash. That's when I saw the envelopes lying on the floor. Final notice. Past due rent. My hands started shaking as I opened them. 3 months behind. I looked around our dark apartment silently. The medicine, the wheelchair, the unpaid bills. And suddenly, one terrifying thought entered my mind. We were about to lose everything. After the rent notices arrived, my life became one long panic attack. Every morning, I woke up feeling like I was already drowning. I started taking extra shifts at the rehab center, sometimes working 16 hours straight before coming home to take care of Mom all night. My body hurt constantly. My back ached from lifting patients. My head pounded from lack of sleep. And emotionally, I was falling apart. But bills didn't care about exhaustion. Neither did life. One afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table staring at our bank account on my phone. $312. That was all we had left. I looked around the apartment slowly. Then I started selling pieces of my life. First my laptop, then my gold necklace Mom gave me on my 21st birthday, then old childhood collectibles I had kept for years. Every item felt like another goodbye. One evening, while grocery shopping, I stood frozen in front of the milk section, calculating prices in my head. If I bought milk, I couldn't buy Mom's medication. If I bought medication, I'd have to skip dinner again. Suddenly, my chest tightened. The store lights felt too bright. Voices became muffled around me. I rushed into the bathroom, shaking violently before collapsing onto the floor. I covered my mouth to stop people from hearing me cry. I wasn't living anymore. I was surviving hour by hour. When I finally got home that night, Tyler was waiting outside the apartment. He looked tired, distant. "We need to talk," he said quietly. My stomach sank instantly. Inside the apartment, Mom was asleep in her room while Tyler stood near the window, avoiding eye contact. "I can't do this anymore," he finally admitted. I stared at him silently. "What do you mean?" He exhaled heavily. "Sarah, your life is chaos now?" I felt anger rise in my chest. "My mother is sick." "I know," he answered quickly, "but everything revolves around her. We never talk anymore. We never go anywhere. You barely even sleep." I laughed bitterly. "You think I want this?" "That's not what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying?" He looked at me with guilt in his eyes. "I'm saying I don't think there's room for me in your life anymore." Those words destroyed something inside me. Not because I didn't already know, but because hearing them out loud made it real. I stood there silently while tears filled my eyes. After 2 years together, he was leaving me when I needed him most. Tyler grabbed his jacket slowly. "I'm sorry." Then he walked out the door. And just like that, another person I loved disappeared from my life. That night, I cried quietly while sitting beside Mom's bed. I thought she was asleep until I felt her weak fingers touch my hand. "Did he leave?" she whispered. I nodded silently. Mom's eyes filled with pain. "This is my fault." "No," I said immediately. "Don't say that." But deep down, part of me blamed the situation too. A few days later, Aunt Carol returned unexpectedly. She brought fake smiles and expensive perfume again. "I came to help," she announced dramatically. I didn't trust her for 1 second. While I cooked dinner in the kitchen, I suddenly heard low voices coming from Mom's bedroom. When I walked closer, I froze. Carol was holding papers in front of my confused mother. "You just need to sign here, Diane," she said sweetly. "This will help Sarah financially." Mom looked disoriented. "I don't understand." My blood turned cold. I grabbed the papers instantly. They were bank authorization forms. Carol wanted access to Mom's remaining savings. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I snapped. Carol rolled her eyes immediately. "Oh, please, Sarah. Somebody has to think logically." "You're trying to steal from her." "Steal?" she scoffed. "Your mother is dying, and you're too emotional to face reality." The room exploded with tension. "She's my mother!" I screamed. "Not your opportunity!" Carol's expression hardened instantly. "Love doesn't pay medical bills," she said coldly. I had never hated someone so much in my life. "Get out!" "Sarah, get out!" Carol grabbed her purse angrily and stormed toward the door. Before leaving, she looked at me with disgust. "You're destroying yourself for a hopeless situation." Then she slammed the door behind her. The apartment became silent except for Mom's weak crying. I sat beside her immediately. "I'm sorry," she whispered shakily. "I didn't understand what she wanted." "It's okay, Mom." But my hands were still trembling with rage. That night, rain poured heavily outside while thunder shook the windows. Mom suddenly stared at me strangely from her bed. For one terrifying second, I thought she was confused again. Then softly, she smiled. "The thunderstorms used to scare you," she whispered. I froze completely. "You used to climb into my bed and sleep on my chest." My eyes widened. She remembered. After months of confusion, she finally remembered something. Tears flooded my eyes instantly. "You remember that?" She nodded weakly. "You were 5 years old," she whispered. "You said my heartbeat sounded safer than the rain." I broke down completely. I buried my face into her blanket while sobbing uncontrollably. Because for one tiny moment, I had my mother back. Later that night, after Mom fell asleep, I searched through an old storage box looking for more blankets. Instead, I found dozens of letters tied together with a ribbon. Letters Mom had written over the years. Birthday letters, encouragement letters, little notes she never gave me. One sentence made me stop breathing. "No matter how hard life becomes, I hope my daughter never feels alone in this world." Tears blurred my vision. And suddenly, I heard Mom gasping for air from the bedroom. I dropped everything and ran. Her face looked pale blue. The heart monitor machine beside her portable oxygen tank started screaming loudly. "Mom!" Her breathing became shallow and frantic. My entire body filled with terror as I grabbed my phone with shaking hands. Outside the apartment window, red ambulance lights flashed through the darkness. The ambulance ride felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I sat beside my mother inside the flashing red lights, while paramedics rushed around us shouting medical terms I could barely understand. Mom struggled to breathe. Her weak fingers searched blindly until they found my hand. I held onto her tightly. "I'm here," I whispered through tears. "I'm right here." At the hospital, doctors moved quickly. Machines beeped loudly around us, while nurses pushed Mom through emergency doors. Then suddenly, I was alone again in another cold waiting room. I hated waiting rooms because they were the places where lives changed forever. An hour later, a doctor finally approached me. His expression told me everything before he even spoke. "Your mother's heart is failing," he said gently. "The stroke caused more damage than we originally realized." I stared at him silently. No reaction, no words. Sometimes pain becomes so big, your body refuses to feel it immediately. "We'll keep her comfortable," he continued softly. "But you should prepare yourself." Prepare yourself. How was I supposed to prepare for losing the only person who ever truly stayed in my life? I walked into Mom's hospital room slowly. The lights were dim. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Machines surrounded her bed like quiet reminders that time was running out. She looked exhausted, fragile, small. But when she saw me, she smiled weakly. "My sunshine," she whispered. The nickname shattered me instantly. I grabbed her hand and pressed it against my forehead while tears poured down my face. "I'm sorry," I cried. "I wasn't strong enough." Mom slowly lifted her trembling fingers to my cheek. "No," she whispered softly. "You were stronger than anyone." I shook my head violently. "I got angry sometimes. I got tired. I complained inside my head." "That's called being human," she said gently. I couldn't stop crying. All the exhaustion, the fear, the loneliness, everything I had buried for months finally exploded out of me. "I didn't want you to suffer," I whispered. Mom looked at me quietly for a long moment. Then she said the words that would stay with me forever. "Loving someone is never a wasted life, Sarah." The room became silent, except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor. I held her hand tighter. "You made my life beautiful," she continued weakly, "even when things were hard." I cried harder hearing those words, because my mother spent her final moments comforting me instead of herself. That was who she was, always loving somebody else more than herself. Around midnight, her breathing became slower, more uneven. I panicked immediately. "Mom!" She looked at me one last time, and somehow, her eyes looked peaceful. "I'm tired, sweetheart," she whispered softly. Then her fingers squeezed mine gently, very gently and slowly. The monitor beside her bed began to flatten into one long sound. For a second, my brain refused to understand what was happening. Doctors rushed in. Nurses moved quickly. Voices filled the room. But all I could see was my mother lying there peacefully, still, gone. The woman who spent her whole life loving me was gone. Something inside me broke in a way that never fully healed. The weeks after her funeral felt empty and colorless. I stopped answering phone calls. I barely ate. The apartment felt unbearably quiet without her voice. No more country music in the kitchen. No more pancakes in the morning. No more "my sunshine." Sometimes I caught myself walking toward her room before remembering she wasn't there anymore. And every single time, it hurt all over again. One afternoon, while cleaning the apartment, I found Mom's blue scarf hanging behind the bedroom door. The same scarf she wore the day she collapsed. I held it against my chest and cried for almost an hour. Grief is strange. It hides in ordinary objects, coffee cups, hairbrushes, old jackets. Tiny things become emotional landmines. Eventually, I forced myself to return to work at the rehab center. At first, I thought I wouldn't survive it emotionally. Every elderly patient reminded me of Mom, but then something unexpected happened. I started seeing them differently. I noticed how many patients rarely received visitors, how some of them stared hopefully at the door every evening, how loneliness hurt them almost as much as illness. So I started spending extra time with them, holding hands, listening to stories, brushing their hair gently the same way I once brushed Mom's. And slowly, without realizing it, my mother was still teaching me how to love people. One evening after work, I stopped at a small cafe near the hospital. Rain tapped softly against the windows while I sat alone, holding a cup of coffee. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe quietly. Then the waitress smiled at me while refilling my cup. "You know," she said warmly, "you look just like your mother when you smile." My chest tightened instantly. For a moment, tears filled my eyes again. But this time, I smiled anyway. Because finally, after all the pain, I understood something. My lovely mother became my patient. But before she left this world, she taught me what real love actually looks like. Real love stays, even when life becomes exhausting, even when money disappears, even when people leave, even when your heart breaks 1,000 times. And if I could go back and relive every painful moment again, I still would have chosen her.